Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Crunching Your Growth, the show where we skip the fluff and focus on the operational fundamentals that actually move the needle. I'm your host, Phil Masiello, and today's guest is a masterclass in scaling. He's a veteran consumer healthcare leader who took Healthline Media from a modest 1 million visitors to a staggering 350 million global users. He's currently the executive chair for OR Health, OAR Health, and he just stepped into the cockpit as the CEO of Sleep Doctor. So he's here to talk about how he's dismantling the barriers to quality sleep care, what it actually takes to lead a category defining business. So please welcome from Sleep Doctor, the CEO, David Kopp. David, thank you for taking the time and coming on the show and talking to us today.
Bill, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure. I mean, I think it's great. Why don't you, if you could just give us a quick background in you, what you've done, how you got here, because it's sort of a different world, right? You were in media first, and now you're in healthcare.
Yeah. Well, I started my career as a marketer at Disney, but then I pretty quickly got into the internet advertising world um, and worked for a number of brands that you've probably heard of, like Yahoo and others. Uh, and then at one point, I concluded for not particularly great reasons that I needed to work in healthcare or health media. It was mostly because I thought healthcare uh, moved slowly, and it was a period of rapid change in digital media generally. And I was like, well, look, you go to the place where things move a little more slowly, you have more time to figure it out. And I don't know that that was it was a great insight, but that's what got me to Healthline Media, and I took over the business. It was not a very good business, and then within a couple of years, we kind of had it to break even and slowly growing. And then a little after we were slowly growing, we were growing a little faster, and then a little faster, and a little faster. And by the time I left, it was a pretty big business and pretty rapid growth business. And we sold it a couple of times. We sold it first to a private equity firm, and then we sold it on to a strategic that owns several digital health brands, Healthline and a couple others in the health category, and CNET and Bankrate and a bunch of others. But but then after that, I had discovered healthcare, and so I really committed myself to health and kind of returned to my roots as a marketer. I really wanted to deliver not just a media product and educate people and influence and have impact on people through the content they read, but actually provide services to them. And I work with a number of businesses that are all direct to consumer health businesses. You mentioned OR, where I'm exec chair. Um, OR is an addiction business where we provide medication assisted treatment for alcohol addiction. And we do it direct to consumer, cash pay business. It's an amazing product, not very well known um, drug that treats alcohol addiction and is very safe, and it's actually what the American Medical Association recommends, but nobody really understands it because it was never marketed as a branded drug. It's a generic drug, so it's not very expensive. Um, but that's a perfect example of the kind of impact I wanted to have, is to take a product that really needs, it's a great product. It just needs a good marketing plan and a good marketing strategy. And the team there has just done a phenomenal job doing that. And now we're trying to do kind of the same thing in sleep care, where sleep care is it's a multi-billion-dollar business, but it's kind of as a consumer, it's a terrible journey. It's very hard to get sleep issues diagnosed and treated, and we're trying to make it easy to do that. And I think in the process, we'll help millions of people sleep better, which that's ultimately what motivates me.
What's funny is I saw that they were using one of the GLP ones. I can't remember which one it was, but they were advertising it recently for as a treatment for sleep apnea. Um,
Yeah.
and I thought that was interesting, and I was wondering if it was the correlation between weight loss and sleep apnea, or if it was actually from I can't remember which one it was, but yeah.
Yeah, so there definitely there is one. Tirzepatide is the compound that um, has been the FDA has actually approved it as a treatment for sleep apnea, um, and uh, it is because of weight loss. But it's interesting. Not all the GLP-1s have that indication from the FDA. So you can get any number of GLP-1s, but there's only the one that actually has the FDA approval, and so they market it as a treatment for sleep apnea, and then typically the insurance companies will reimburse it under slightly different criteria, but sometimes it's easier because if you have sleep apnea, it's often easier to get that drug um, paid for by your insurance.
Yeah. Well, the GLP-1s are everywhere now. I mean, you can.
Yeah,
It's all that.
I mean, you talk about case study in growth. I mean, it is a fascinating story.
It is a fascinating story, but now there's like I saw that the FDA went after this site that was selling just like garbage, claiming it was a GLP-1, and it was just from China, and it was awful
Yeah,
product. So, you wind up with like all these fake products now. But I mean, it's incredible what's happened in the last, because really it's only been like I think 3 or 4 years since it
yeah,
became accessible, and now it's like it's everywhere. But I also heard somebody brought up that GLP-1s are also a good treatment for addictions. Um,
yeah,
so
yeah. So the GLP-1s, like when you look at why they have the impact that they have, some of it is because of the way they affect um, like it's how it affects your brain. But specifically, it's that your brain gets a lot of reinforcement from the dopamine pathway around things that aren't always great for you. So, and again, this all depends on individual biology.
yeah,
It's like
sure,
it may affect you and not affect me, but a lot of people's brains um, are really wired to food, and they're wired in a way where they get the same kind of reward from. I mean, you would say that they're addicted, but addiction is a dopamine related pathway, and um, and the GLP-1s have some effect on that. That it's interesting. This addiction drug is called naltrexone. It's a generic drug, but naltrexone is pretty much exactly what it does. It only really affects that dopamine pathway and it breaks that cycle so that people have it for strength and then they just don't chase the high
yeah,
because they're not getting that kind of reaction from their dopamine pathway. But GLP-1s have a little bit the same kind of mechanism. It's not the primary of how it works, and so I think and I'm not a scientist, so I don't really understand all that stuff that closely, but there is a lot of similarity.
yeah. I heard Eric Clapton was a known. He had struggled with alcohol and drugs for many many years, and he opened up his own treatment center down on one of the islands. But I heard him on a interview one time when she said, how far back do you think you were addicted? And he said, I think it goes back to my childhood with sugar, with candy
Yeah,
bars, and
yeah,
and I would agree with that because alcohol turns into sugar in the body and all that stuff. So and they all hit the same, like you said, the
yeah.
same dopamine. So
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was building Healthline, I went through a whole phase of being I was very fixated on sugar and how sugar is an incredibly addictive substance and it's different for different people, which really underlines how addiction is kind of this very interesting thing. It affects some people a lot and some people little.
yeah,
Um, Sugar, like for me, it was a 2 week process to break the addiction. And I remember the first time that somebody put a plate of cookies down on the, conference room table, and I just had no desire. Like, and I'm a total, normally I have a little bit of sweet tooth. You put a plate of cookies in front of me, I'm not going to be able to resist it. And the first time that happened, I was almost upset because I was like, wow, this probably speaks to how I'm a little bit of a control freak, but I was like, I'm normally out of control. Like I normally couldn't have, but a couple weeks of breaking that cycle, and it was fine. For other people, it's 6 weeks, and it takes that much longer, and it's that much harder. But I think when you start to think about that in terms of alcohol or food or any of these kinds of things, um, it's really interesting because it gives us some respect for the fact that like everyone's journey is a little bit different on that,
Yeah.
and our biology is a little bit different in the same way that you rarely meet somebody who's your exact twin. So why would their brain work the same way? Why would their body work the same way?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
Getting back to business though, you took Healthline really from 1 million to 350 million uh, uh, visitors, right? And
yeah,
many founders get stuck at like the first million, or even just getting to a million.
yeah.
Um, what do you think that pattern interrupt or specific operational shift that allowed you to scale 350x?
Yeah, I mean, I think every business is different, of course, and within the challenge, within the scaling of Healthline, interestingly enough, the audience was kind of it wasn't necessarily easy to scale the audience, but it's the simplest to explain. Um, and the strategy was probably the simplest of all the things. Like scaling revenue was much harder than scaling
Yeah.
audience. The reason, so when you step back and you look at like the health and media landscape of the 2010 to 2020 when I was there, um, 80% of people, if you just stop them on the street and say, hey, how do you learn what you need to learn about health? They would say, I go to Google. And interestingly, it's not like I go to search, it's I go to Google. And if you look back 10 years before that, it was kind of the same answer. The answer 10 years before that might have been I go to search. But there's this very steady consumer behavior of like, hey, when you need some information, you go to Google. So for us, it's very simple. If we want to grow our audience, we have to figure out the Google game. And the Google game during that period was actually a very predictable game.
Yeah.
Um, Now, we were one of the first to really figure it out. Um, but I think a lot of it came from the fact that just culturally, we really didn't believe in gaming things. We were like, look, we want to produce the best piece of content. We think Google wants to surface the best piece of content. Just produce the best piece of content on a given query. And we took that simple strategy, and over time, we built on it. But that was the core of the strategy for the 10 years of growth. And it really did drive the growth. Now, you end up, what starts off simple ends up being more complex.
Right.
But that principle never changed. I think the big things just changed were like, hey, when you're starting from a million, you're like, well, I want to produce 1,000 pieces of content. Okay, well, there's some complexity in 1,000 pieces of content. We're going to take, maybe not the 1,000 most popular health queries, but the 1,000 that we think have terrible results that we can improve because those will be easy. And you're like, okay, that wasn't that complex. We had 20 people in our editorial team. Like, that's a manageable enterprise. Well, then the next phase is like, well, okay, now we want to double that. Well, it's not going to be 1,000 because we already picked off the 1,000 biggest query terms, uh, or we skipped over some that we thought would be really hard. So we either got to figure out how to go back and pick up those really hard ones and figure out how to produce a better piece of content than maybe a WebMD or National Institutes of Health. Or we got to produce 2,000 pieces of content because the tail there was kind of there's a bunch of head getting to the mid tail and the tail. And so you had to cope with those kinds of challenges. But I think we took it very stepwise on that growth strategy and that audience growth strategy of just like, okay, we know what we need to do for the next year, and then the year after that, we're like, okay, now it's got to get a little more challenging. Um, that, one of the things that was interesting within that story is we so we part of it is the larger context. Nothing happens in isolation. So we sold the company to a private equity firm, and at the point we sold them, we probably reached about 10 million people a year in the U.S. And our global number is probably three times that. Generally, like as we scaled, the U.S. was about a third of the total reach, although probably half the traffic. And so we reached about 10 million people. And so we ran it for about a year under this private equity firm. And there's a lot of seasonality to the business, and there's lots of things going on in the business. So it's not always easy to really see the trajectory on your
Right.
growth.
Right.
We stepped back at the end of that year and we were like, you know what? Like when you factor in seasonality and all those things, we're not actually growing. We've kind of, we'd evolved three or four times in our approach to things. We'd taken on these different challenges, but we sort of realized like, hey, like we're kind of flat, which is not great, given that the engine, even for our revenue, was the audience growth.
Right.
So at that point, first of all, it was a defining moment, I think, for the culture of the company, because so much of our growth was tied to our audience growth, and so much of our success, we knew we had to figure that out. So it was a very all hands on deck, like let's figure out what we're made of kind of a moment. There were a bunch of things we did, and the details of it probably don't really matter. I think what mattered was that we evolved our cultural principles, right? So we had started with this principle of produce a better piece of content. And what we learned in that process is that we'd gotten to a size where there weren't easy pickings. And this happens to every company. And we said, well, at this point, if we keep doing what we were doing last month, last year, we're not going to win because our competitors aren't standing still. And we've kind of taken on the really easy stuff. So we're just kind of spinning. And so we modified that kind of principle of producing the best piece of content to this idea of relentless progress, that we have to actually make it better every day. And we started making a different level of investment. Instead of saying, hey, these are the things that worked last week, let's just keep doing those, we started saying, we have to always be improving because the market is going to improve.
Yeah.
And I think that was a watershed moment for the company once we really got that instilled in the culture and we started making more proactive investments in the quality. One of the things we did that like none of our competitors did at the time, and now it's just kind of funny because AI makes it so easy to do this, but we hired a whole copy edit team. And the return on investment for a copy edit team is hard to like, it's hard to understand, like, okay, what does a copy editor do? I know what a writer does, and I know what a line editor does. Writer produces a great piece of content, a line editor makes it like really easy to read. Copy editor actually just makes all the content feel more cohesive, a little more fluid. There usually is some fluidity. There's usually a voice, so now there's more consistency, article to article. But it's a sort of like, how do you put an ROI on that? And we couldn't, but we made that investment because we sort of believed in this principle that like you just got to make the content better, and that's something that will ultimately make better. And it's interesting because I think that's one of the things that led to kind of the next big breakthrough for us was that we went from this like, oh, we reached 10 million people in the US and 30 in the globally to like then all of a sudden a couple of years after that we're reaching 100 million people. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that our content became actually much more cohesive, much more recognizable, and our brand awareness really followed it. And you would never get like if somebody had shown up and said this is why we should do copy edit, I would have been like, that seems like a stretch.
Yeah.
But we invested in it more on the principle that we just knew it was kind of the right thing to do to produce a great piece of content.
Yeah.
And I think those, I mean, that challenge was one where quality wins. And so it was really, you know, kind of to the point. It's not that complex a challenge. It's maybe complex to deliver against it, but it was like, we just got to produce the best piece of content.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Google was a little bit different too back then.
Google was very consistent then.
Yeah.
And if you look, I mean, part of what Sleep Doctor does, we have a small media business, and it's Google is not predictable or consistent. I mean, their algorithm changes day to day. Rankings move around in the course of a day. There's no clear signal coming back from them about what they view as a great piece of content versus an average piece of content. Um, there's some, but the signal to noise ratio is just really hard to discern today. That wasn't true. I was lucky in that 10-year period of growth. We were operating in a pretty consistent universe from a Google standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, no question. It's gotten a little bit, but I think all the algorithms have become inconsistent. I mean, even like TikTok and social media, as to what makes a great video changes
Yeah,
every day. What makes Google, what makes a great piece of content on Google changes every day. And I think Google's changing itself every day as the algorithm sort of continues to evolve. So, yeah, it's always a moving target. It's amazing. Like
yeah. As a marketer, it's much harder today than it was even 5 years ago.
yeah, we create content for brands that we put out on social, and one day, this pattern works great, and you get millions of views, and it's fantastic, and then the next day it's like it's like crickets, and you go, what the heck? It's the exact same
Yeah,
thing, and yeah, it's amazing, especially TikTok. I find TikTok the most challenging, unless you're just creating funny videos and you've created like this audience. But those funny videos don't necessarily help a brand. They work great for content creators, but not necessarily a brand. So yeah,
yeah. I think that the social universe is actually, and the social algorithms are much harder in a sense because there's there's not nearly as static a definition of what. I mean, certainly, if you compare it to the Google algorithms of 2010 or 2012, I mean, there was this kind of quasi-static definition of quality and what it takes to rank. I think in the social world, what it takes to rank is a level of engagement with a specific audience. And so the magic is like it's not just creating engaging content, but it's got to be relatively targeted because a generically interesting piece of content or generically engaging piece of content almost always gets beaten by a specifically engaging piece of content. And
yeah,
so it ends up just being this incredibly cacophonous, noisy environment where you're right. Like what works today, and then suddenly somebody comes up with a better mousetrap for women of a certain age who happen to be your target, and you're getting crickets from what worked yesterday.
yeah. What we try and focus on, and what we try and get everybody to focus on, which is so difficult sometimes. People get so focused on the vanity metrics, views and number of views and hearts, likes. But what we're always trying to do is get the whole purpose is to get clicks to back to the site or clicks
Yeah,
back to the page, and that's the thing I really don't care if we get 500,000 views or 100,000 views or 50,000 views. I care about how many clicks we got back. And what's amazing is some days, you'll have a piece of content out there that got, 10 or 15,000 views, but it got 100, 150, 200 clicks back to exactly where you wanted it to go. And some days you'll
yeah,
get, 200,000 views and 5 clicks, and
yeah.
it's just, some days it drives us absolutely insane. And we try and we just keep these running metrics and analytics, and we just try and continually update it using an AI tool to try and figure out like if there's a pattern and what that pattern is. And it's almost random. So
Yeah, yeah.
no.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, it's like it's not surprising because it sort of is. It's more the algorithm. If the algorithm is doing a perfect job, it is reflecting the whims of the audience.
Right.
And so when you think about it that way, you're like, well, of course it's going to change
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, Meta, especially even with ads now on Meta, if we're running ads on Meta, it's so up and down.
Yeah,
And you really have to change the content, more frequently. And yeah, but you're 100% right. Like we've started to really, and we're actually one client. We just had this conversation for about 2 hours this morning because we said, we're gonna we're just gonna niche it down as far as we can because we have a better set of metrics now, so we know exactly who's buying the product. So I don't
yeah,
care about the broadness. I don't care if we get a million views or this. We now know this is who we're going after. So let's niche it down. And it's even for the even I think people intuitively, CEOs and presidents of companies that are brands, intuitively know that. But then when they see it happening, they get nervous. And you're
yeah.
going, but you look, your sales are better and the costs are down. It's cost per acquisition's falling, and so yeah, but we're not getting as many. And you're like, that's the whole plan. So
Yeah, there's an interesting push pull between um, the efficiency and the scale, and um, we're living in this in our sleep care business right now. Partly because I mean, what we're trying to do in sleep care is partly we're trying to run a business, acquire customers cost effectively, and deliver good service to them and help them sleep better.
sure,
Um, but the vision isn't to serve a few hundred people; it's to serve millions of people.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so scale also matters. And I think what we have concluded, and I have a really strong marketing department that I think does a good job with running this cycle of like, okay, you got to broaden the funnel, which means you're going to move mid and upper funnel. It's going to get less efficient, and you're going to drive more volume. You're going to drive more demand to the bottom of the funnel, where you've really optimized that bottom of the funnel experience, and you can do very cost effective acquisition. You're going to do a set of refinement. You're going to get those numbers a little bit better, and then you're going to do it again, and then you're going to do it again. And so, you know, you're going to add audiences to broaden. You're going to add channels to broaden, but ultimately, you're going to go through this same cycle where it's like it gets worse and then it gets better, but your scale is not going up when your efficiency is getting better. And so then you have to get less efficient to drive up more scale. And that yo-yo kind of experience, I think it's tough. It's, when you're, yeah, for you and me who we live with it every day, it's a little easier to manage. I think for investors it's not always linear. It doesn't
yeah,
make linear sense. It doesn't fit into the spreadsheet sheet quite the way that you would want it to. Um, and there's a lot of art amidst the science, and those things make you a little uncomfortable
oh
if it's
yeah.
your money that's going into the marketing spend.
Yeah, I would agree. People try to make it so predictable, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not,
Yeah,
because things change. And you could be predictable for 3 or 4 months, and then all of a sudden something changes, and you've got to sort of stay on top of it. And people do have a hard time. I think investors, CEOs, presidents, of companies sometimes they're looking for this linear, predictable model, and it doesn't always exist.
yeah,
Um, I mean, you try and make it as predictable as possible, but you have to stay on top of it every day because we're in an auction. It's an auction environment, and so
yeah,
therefore, that's going to change daily, right? We have a company right now that's a shaving company, and we're going into Father's Day. It's the second biggest holiday after fourth quarter, and so things are going to change. It's not going to be so predictable. The costs are going to go up. The customer acquisition cost is going to go up. And as much
Well,
as
and your competitors are unpredictable. So,
right,
especially in that kind of a market where your competitors can really, I mean, we've definitely, in my career, I've definitely seen irrational behavior on the part of a competitor, which you're like, well, that was a terrible decision for you. You're losing money, but so am I.
right,
And there's really nothing I can do about it because you have sucked a bunch of customers out of the marketplace. You gave them a huge discount, so like they're not going to be my customer. Um, so my spend got less efficient. Your spend maybe was more efficient, but your profitability went down. You're probably regretting you did it, but at the end of the day, we both lost.
yeah. and and
um,
then and then to follow that up, right? We've got Father's Day, and then following that up, Amazon's changed Prime Day to the last the third week, I think, in June, or the last week in June, which the that category happens to be very big on Prime Day. It happens to
yeah,
react very well. So we know that there's going to be some irrationality because you've got a lot of sellers with white label product on Amazon that are going to just start doing ridiculous things with pricing. And so yeah, it's going to
yeah,
be it gets really unpredictable. So,
yeah,
but you're right.
yeah.
People,
It's every day is a little bit different.
yeah,
What it
yeah.
boils down to.
But you moved from really a content first model at Healthline to you're more of a product and service model.
Yeah, I mean, we are a direct to consumer marketer of products and services. And we're moving more toward really services as we're effectively a sleep clinic. Um, if you went to our website today, you'd say, well, you sell a lot of home sleep tests and you sell a lot of treatment, like whether it's an oral appliance or a CPAP machine. Um, but over time, I think that will evolve toward more of a service offering because that's really what consumers need. They don't need the product; they need the relationship with a physician and the trust that comes out of that, and the results that come from having a trusted partnership with a physician to make those decisions around diagnosis and treatment. And this is actually one of the things that I'm really passionate. Like, it's why I want to work in consumer health. Is that I think that it was interesting when I was at Healthline. I read a lot of studies around like what drives better patient outcomes, and one of the things that's just really consistent is that when patients are involved in their care, they're actually a decision maker in their care versus a victim of care, right? You can imagine sometimes you show up and the doctor says, just do this, and walks out of the room, and you're like, who am I? Like, I'm just
Right,
the
right.
victim. But when that patient really feels like, okay, I talked to my doctor about it, and then I made the decision, I committed to this treatment, they have better outcomes. It's just categorical, almost across any condition. Um, Not everyone, unfortunately, but almost all of them. Sleep care is a great example of one where that is true. You are not going to start sleeping better if you don't want to do what your doctor tells you to do, right? You have to find your motivation. And so for us, trying to build the business is actually a lot about trying to build the trust between our clinicians and ultimately our brand and our patients, and to empower our patients so that our patients don't say, oh yeah, I went there and they prescribed something for me and now I'm all better. It's like, no, I went there, I I got the help and the understanding that I needed in order to solve my own problem. And now I'm on a program that I helped design that actually has me sleeping better.
Yeah.
Um, because sleep's like all these other things we've been talking about in healthcare. It's like it's different for every person, um, and you know yourself better than your doctor does. And a lot of it is like you get to motivation. It's like you think about diet or fitness. It's like the right solution in diet and fitness is the one that the patient will do. That's like that's the definition.
Yeah.
Um, And that looks different for different people.
Well, I think there's been enough studies out that have tied diet, fitness, and sleep together for
Oh
long-term
yeah,
health. Because, if you don't get good sleep, and believe me, I know when I don't get good sleep that it affects you for the whole day.
yeah.
And I used to have issues with it, but you have to work on it and solve the problem and solve the reason. And
What, like, if I can ask, what worked for you?
to be honest, I think I told you this when we first talked. Was I was buying the oral mouth guard because I was grinding at night, and which was waking me up. And so I was using that mouth guard, and I went through about a dozen of them because my dog kept taking them and eating them. But I was buying them from Sleep Doctor, and they worked great. It has that little adjustment that you put in when you put it in your mouth,
Yeah,
to get it, and that truly worked. Um, and then I started. I it also I stopped eating late, and then because food will mess me up, and I don't eat a big meal at dinner anymore, and the third thing was that I exercise in the morning now, not at night, because at night
yeah,
it was too stimulating, and so those three things really helped me now. And then I watch
yeah.
it. I check it almost every morning. It's a joke with my wife, but I check it almost every morning to see how my what my sleep score was on my Apple
Yeah.
app. So you know,
Yeah, I mean, your story though is so interesting because, like, if you think about the marketing challenge behind that and the product and service challenge behind that, is like I could name three or four other things that you're probably not doing that have worked for other people, and you would probably say, I don't think that would work for me, and that ends up being a lot of the challenge. Is that I like you, the eating thing is definitely influences my sleep. I was just talking to my mother. My mother is like, if I don't eat at night, I don't sleep well. And I don't know, her metabolism is just very different. Her, like, the way her body works is very different. I totally believe that that's true. She knows, she has first person data on
sure,
what works for her and doesn't. And finding a clinician that will actually listen and say, okay, yeah, for you, probably a different set of things than what worked for Phil. Um, and so we've tried to design that kind of a service offering that is more patient centric, more um, flexible in the way we approach what often are pretty inflexible clinical standards.
yeah,
You got to give the doctor has a lot of discretion. They don't have to follow clinical standards. In our case, we want to have a very clear protocol for every patient encounter, um, but you got to have flexibility within those protocols so that
yeah,
it works
yeah.
for
It
the
is.
patient.
It's truly different by people. I mean, it's a joke, but I grew up in New York, but I have tons of friends and family there, and New Yorkers eat late. I don't know why. It's a cultural thing. I don't know why, but they'll go out to dinner at 8 o'clock at night and eat, and then they go home, chit chat for a little bit, and they're in bed by 10:30. And I could never do that. I can't eat dinner at 8 o'clock and then go to bed at 10 or 10:30.
Yeah,
So, but I also changed the way that I eat. Like I eat, my breakfast is really my biggest meal. And then, dinner is very light. And that's helped me tremendously because
yeah.
I don't, it's just the way my body works. And then exercising in the morning instead of at night is the other thing that
I've made both of those same modifications, and it's definitely very helpful.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. But the other thing that I wanted to ask was, David, was, what do you think? Because you moved again, you sort of you moved from a content first model to a product and service model,
Yeah,
And what do you think when you look at founders, because you've seen other businesses, what do you think the biggest mistake founders make when trying to monetize an audience with a physical or a clinical product?
Yeah, I mean that is a good question. I think that most um, most media businesses, so content audience aggregation centric businesses, have some variation on an advertising model
Right.
because it is hard to, as opposed to a direct service or direct product model, because it is hard to do two very different things well.
Yeah.
And the challenge of growing an audience is like it's kind of like, okay, that takes a basketball player, and then the challenge of, you know, building and marketing a product offering or service offering, that takes a football player. Well, most organizations, you know, can't do both. What's interesting, and so I actually just think like try to avoid it is 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 the answer. But there's this reverse model that I think you're seeing much more consistently now, which is that very strong direct to consumer marketers. So they have a product or service offering. They're that football player. They know how to build a direct and market a direct to consumer offering. And what they're starting to do is essentially insource a media business. So you saw probably that I think OpenAI actually bought a media business. You've seen a couple players in the pet space buy pet media businesses,
Yeah.
and you see a bunch of examples of this across the. And these aren't huge acquisitions, but they're essentially saying, "Hey, there's a lot of leverage from owning this audience." Um, but I think when you start with the audience and try to move to the product, that is a harder switch than starting with the product and saying, "Hey, how do I build a media platform to support this product or service offering?" Sleep Doctor's got both. So we have an in-sourced media business, but we actually started with the media business and then added. So we are that kind of counter example, but I actually think it's easier to do it the other way, where you have a strong service offering or product offering, and and then find a media business that fits well. Like you see this a lot with people will do um, they'll start with like an influencer relationship with a podcaster or a creator, and then you look a little bit later and you're like, what, that influencer or creator now works for that company.
Yeah.
And that's essentially the same thing, right? It's a product or service based, you know, direct consumer marketing business that's saying, hey, creator, you're a media expert. You've built an audience. You understand our product. We're going to bring you in to be kind of an internal media arm. And I think that model works very well. And it's less risky,
Yeah.
right? Because you kind of know what you're getting. You can try before you buy usually, because you can build kind of a more traditional advertising based relationship with those creators. Um, and then especially in this kind of very fragmented media world where, you know, you have these individual creators, it's actually cost effective to say, well, just come work for us.
Yeah.
And actually it's attractive. Like probably a lot of those creators are like, well, that'll be a much steadier,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I just actually spoke to somebody in the pet business. They were making manufacturing pet products, collars and leashes and things like that. And they actually bought uh, a media company that was doing um, pet not pet content, but they were also selling cards online, digitally, and
Oh yeah.
also paper. And they were doing cards for geared towards pets. And yeah, I mean, it seems to be working out pretty well. So I think you're probably right on there. That's easy to integrate. I never thought about it that way, but you're probably right.
Yeah, I think that in general that kind of, you know, we evolve our way into owning a media business, you're going to see a lot more of. Because we're kind of moving to this creator economy, marketing departments are employing so many creators, either fractionally or full time, that it's just natural. They're like, well, I found a creator who really seems to have the zeitgeist of my audience and my product. Like, I want him working here full time, and I'm going to give him a little bit more of a broad remit to build an audience.
Yeah.
And pretty soon, I'm a media business operating within a direct consumer brand.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to find the right creators. You have to find the ones that have the right audience, that are doing a good job, that represent the brand well, which is also, you have to go through, I think, you have to go through a lot of creators to find the ones that really work, that are worth acquiring or worth,
Yeah,
bringing in. But
yeah, yeah.
because, yeah. So,
That fit between the creator and the brand is and the audience is tough.
yeah. I mean, I think it's easier in some, like in some channels, food, there's a lot of great food creators out there that have been able to build a really good relationship with their audience. Um, and then I think when you get into other categories, it's a little bit more, difficult. I don't know how it is in your category, because I would think,
Yes, it's interesting because it's kind of this is probably the point you're making is that there are a handful of people who all they do is sleep, but most people who talk about sleep also talk about other wellness stuff. So for us, it ends up being more of a um, we're going to build a network of influencers where we get a little bit of an influencer's time because that's the little bit that they talk about sleep, and the rest of the time they're talking about diet and fitness and other and hydration and whatever
yeah,
else. But we do have, there are a couple of people who really do. Actually, there's more than a couple. There's probably a dozen people out there who really focus on health, and one of the best. I mean, I would say the best, or we wouldn't be working with him, is Dr. Bruce. He was our founder for sleepdoctor.com, but he's effectively our influencer in chief. And he's fantastic. He's a board certified sleep physician.
yeah,
He's PhD in clinical psychology. So he's a ton of credibility, but he's great in front of a camera. He's on the Today Show a bunch of times every year. And, he's constantly doing podcasts and talking about how to make your sleep better. And you can't throw a question about sleep at him that he can't answer. But he's the exception as opposed to the rule in our category.
yeah,
The
yeah,
rule is more somebody who's like, hey, I've got a couple of sleep hacks that I want to talk about.
yeah,
And, uh, we'll work with those people. But they also they don't always bring the level of credibility that a doctor would bring.
yeah. Well, we're almost out of time. Again, I appreciate you coming on. Any last minute words for people? Whether it's about business or whether it's about sleep or whatever, and then also, you know, just reiterate the website so people know where to find you or find about the
Oh
product.
yeah.
Yeah,
If you're not sleeping well, sleepdoctor.com, and we will try to help you. The last thing I would say, just because I think talking about this idea of growth and the challenge of the entrepreneurial journey, the thing that I have always found um, to be critical in that journey is a level of introspection, an unusual level of introspection and curiosity. Um, I was having this conversation with somebody on my team, but it was taking me back to my Healthline days. So I was talking to him today about we're having a lot of success in one area of our business. He was like, I can't quite figure out what it's coming from. He's like, it might be this, it might be this other thing. I am digging in. I'm gonna figure it out. And I was like, amen.
yeah,
Because success or failure matters less than understanding the success or failure. I could give you a bunch of examples from our Healthline days where we had a setback, but we dug in, we figured out why we had a setback, and we turned it into a win.
right.
Like one of the biggest examples, we had Google did an algorithm release, and we lost about 1 or 2% of our traffic, and it was very unusual. Like we were generally, it was kind of pretty steady up and to the right. We did a good job, and so this was this huge opportunity. Well, what ended up happening is we figured out what it was, and so we said, well, okay, we see all the articles that got penalized. Like we know what the problem was. We fixed those articles and we got the traffic back. And then we said, well, we have a whole bunch of other articles that don't do a great job on that particular thing. Let's go fix those articles to do a great job. And suddenly we turned that loss into a win because we had been relentless in our curiosity and
Yeah.
introspection to understand that. And I think if you have that as a founder, um, you do something that if you're, I mean, I'm a huge Good to Great Jim Collins fan. He talks about this idea of return on luck.
Right.
That, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
simple concept is that look, good luck and bad luck happens. The best companies are faster at responding to good luck or faster at responding to bad luck, right? They take advantage of good luck and they respond quickly to bad luck.
Yeah.
That's what defines a great company. And I think the muscle tone that you need to do that is that curiosity and introspection.
Yeah. I would
Um,
agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you. You have to dig in to understand what's happening. If you just accept it, then you're not going to be able to replicate it. You're not going to be able to measure it. You're not going to know if it's going to happen again. So I agree with you. But listen, David, I really, really appreciate it. I think it was a great conversation. I really appreciate your insights and everything you've shared. Um, all your information will be in the description. We'll have a link to Sleep Doctor in the description. We put your LinkedIn in there just in case anybody wanted to ever get in touch with you. And yeah, so again,
that's
I appreciate
fantastic. I
you.
really enjoyed it, Phil. Thanks for making time for me, and I
My
look forward
pleasure.
to chatting with you in the future as well.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. All
Take
right,
care.
everybody. We will see you next week with another great show.